Christian Roy, who is here to talk to us about his project. He's a project coordinator and main researcher for Projet TAMIS. He has worked on many projects combining cultural content, metadata, algorithms, and technology. He is also the founder and CEO of Hercules, a market intelligence tool for book professionals. He was previously VP of Technologies at Demark, a leading Canadian vendor of ebook distribution solutions.
Hi, everybody. Nice to be here. I'm glad I was invited to talk about this project. And before I dive into the actual project, I'm going to give you a bit of context just to explain why we came up with that project and the steps we took to work on it. Just before we start, as was mentioned, my name is Christian. I'm from Quebec City. Obviously for me, Toronto is a warm place. Apparently there's no snow left, but it's still a Canadian reality that we have everywhere. So the context that I was talking about that is quickly changing is how consumers are looking for products, and especially for books. And I'm sure you're all familiar with that experience of customers going to a bookstore or a library and asking for a specific book, and they'll go into the details. You know, it's a book that takes place on a beach, and there's a bug on the cover page, and the cover page is green. So could you help me find that specific book? And then they expect the person at the other end to be able to figure out among all the thousands and hundreds of thousands of books available which one has a green cover page with a bug in it, and it's a thriller taking place on a beach. And consumers are expecting more and more of that personalized experience. And sometimes if they don't find the answers to their questions, or if they don't want to go to the bookstore or to the library, they'll ask their favorite search engine, maybe on their bookstore website, but more and more on general public search engines like this popular one. And so what happens is that they're starting to ask those questions to other places or other technologies, and at some point, they'll also ask their digital assistants about those books. And as we move to the voice-powered user interfaces, the way that we discover books is going to change as well. So expectations are changing, but also the way that we search and that we see results is changing. This is the typical search result page for Google a few years ago, with organic results listing links to specific contents. Now more and more what you're going to see on Google, and this is, I'm taking Google as an example, but of course this is going to happen everywhere. You'll see rich snippets, what they call rich cards or info snippets that give you the answer to your question. So they're no longer linking to a website, they're giving you the answer. And as this happens, and when you move to smaller screens, and you know that more than 50% of search now is on mobile, you have less screen estate, so the number of results that come up is shrinking. So instead of having 20 organic result links on your Google page, on your mobile device, you have 3 or 4 books that are suggested. And this is going to be even more true when we come to vocal assistants, because obviously it would be awkward for your assistant to go ahead and give you 20 results, because it's going to be a 5-minute conversation and you want one quick result. So all those trends together bring us to a paradigm shift where from the book point of view, from the book marketing point of view, we're moving from the preoccupation of being indexed, existing on the list, to the preoccupation of being discoverable. When a consumer needs something specific, the book should be suggested to them in some way. And we're moving from the idea of searching things and having multiple results and then browsing those results to being recommended something. Because when you have only 1 or 2 results, it really is a recommendation. It's not a search result. And recommendations require a lot of data Actually, you need to match consumer information with product information. And I'm sure we can trust a lot of the social media platforms and search engines to gather the consumer data. Whether it's for good or for bad, they do that very well, and they know where you've been, what you bought in the past, and so on. However, we also need to match those consumer data with actual products, with the content of the books. And that is where Projet TAMIS is coming from. So let's recap that quickly. The consumer expectations for personalized recommendations is increasing. The screen size, when the screen size is decreasing, we need more data, given that, to do good recommendations. And the way we describe books is not changing a lot. So what we're trying to do in our project is do some action research, and by that we mean researching solutions, but also trying to apply them and see how it goes, and can we do things with AI that can help marketing those books. And we want to do it based on 3 main hypotheses. And our hypotheses are that the first one is that AI, artificial intelligence, can help humans in generating more data about books. So it's not about replacing, it's not about doing the job, it's about helping humans do something better in terms of describing the book. The second hypothesis is that AI can do it at a large scale. I don't think there's interest in investing in research and development for describing 10 or 20 or 50 books. We want to be able to go to backlist titles, to hundreds of thousands of backlist titles, and enrich their metadata, because we'll want those new search engines and new discoverability tools to be able to dive into that data. And the third, more fundamental hypothesis is that books can describe themselves. I mean, everything that's in there is very rich, and if we find ways to surface it, it will be useful for the consumers. This project was made possible thanks to the support from the Digital Strategy Fund, from the Canada Council for the Arts. So we want to thank them, of course. But it's also publisher-led project. So it was initiated by les Éditions du Septentrion, a Quebec City-based publisher, but it's also supported by many other publishers. So all those publishers gave us the permission to use their book content to do all our work. So we wanted to be sure that we did everything in an ethical and legal way. So we have permissions from the publishers to use their content. So we were able to work with a bit more than 5,000 books to do our research, our training, and so on. So that was a context. Let's dive into the main topic. I'm going to do a very quick introduction to artificial intelligence so that you have an idea of what we're talking about and how it works. I don't want to spend too much time onto the technical details, but switch as soon as possible to the actual results. And then we will discuss a few potential applications for the future. So, quick intro. When you want to describe artificial intelligence, it's hard not to define it, and defining intelligence is hard, so defining artificial intelligence is hard as well. One of the definitions I like the most is a non-technical one. I've put a link to the Digipub podcast. It's a 20 minutes on artificial intelligence for publishers, and Lisa Daly, who's the former CTO of Safari Books, gives a very interesting definition of AI by saying it's anything that a computer has not quite mastered yet and that we like to think is related to intelligence. So this is a bit of a fuzzy definition, but it just makes sense. And she says it's a moving window, and she gives the example of 15, 20 years ago, imagining that your phone could give you directions to go from point A to point B, taking into account the traffic and suggesting the right place to go to shorten the time it takes to go from there to there, was science fiction, or it sounded like artificial intelligence, and now it's just a commodity. Things change. So this is an interesting definition. The more academic definition involves a lot of technical terms. So what is supervised learning and unsupervised learning and so on, and I don't want to talk about this today. The thing I want you to remember is the idea of learning, and again, learning is probably a word too strong to describe what computers can do today, but let's just take it for granted that when we say that that the machine is learning, that is, it's recognizing patterns. We're providing examples, and it knows how to recognize patterns and then apply them to something else. So what that means, and I was told that I couldn't do a presentation without cat pictures, so here are the cat pictures. If you take hundreds or thousands of cat pictures and feed them to an AI algorithm and say, those are cats, and then you do that with dog pictures, and then with other animals and things like that, what you're really building is computer vision. So you're teaching a computer to recognize those things, and then hopefully, when you provide it with a new picture that it's never seen, it should be able to say, well, on this book cover page, there's a dog, and there's also a woman, and there's a beach, and there's grass, and so on. And the same can be done with text. And the text part is called either natural language processing or natural language understanding, etc. It's not that hard. It's funny because one of my friends sent that to me. There's a website called Machine Learning for Kids. As the name implies, it's for kids, and it talks about machine learning, and it offers activities that you can do with your kids to train an AI to look at book cover pages and categorize those books, which is very similar to what we're trying to achieve in our project. So, you know, we were very proud of ourselves when we're doing research and development. Apparently, this is also a kids thing, but so we're trying to do it on a larger scale. But you could have fun. I haven't tried it, but I looked at the instructions. It looks very educative in terms of what the machine learning process is, and if you want to go deeper into that, you could do that. So, our project. First, I'm going to go briefly over our methodology and then show you the results. For those of you who were at the previous presentation, at the end we discussed a bit the off-the-shelf tools that can be used to apply AI to book content. So the first step we did in our project was to do a survey, an inventory of all the vendors that offered APIs that we could use to go through book content and generate data. So those are the vendors that we identified. Of course, one of our challenges, and my previous question about in the previous presentation was about that. Our concern is that all our content's in French, and most of those vendors offer gazillions of features for English content, but not so much for other languages. But things are changing very quickly. For instance, the Amazon Web Service tools. So Amazon Web Service is a different division from Amazon, that the retail side of Amazon. They're offering cloud solutions, just like Microsoft or IBM. So the Amazon service a few months ago supported English only, and then during our work, they started supporting French, Italian, German, Spanish, and so on. So things are changing very quickly. So anyways, we did an inventory of those and figured which ones could help us generate data. We quickly tried them online, so you can go ahead, Google, for instance, Microsoft Cloud Vision, and you'll be able to just drag and drop your cover page images and see what the AI has to say about those images. We benchmarked them, and this may be of interest for you, for those who would want to replicate our experiments, because we open sourced all the code we built to do the benchmarking. So this is code to which you can just give 100 images, and it will submit it to all the vendors who support computer vision, and it will create a table of all the results and reports that you can browse to see, you know, to get a feel of the results and how they would apply to you. Then we did some analysis, and we shared all the results. We're still sharing results on that blog, tamis.ca. All the results are in French for now, but we're planning to translate some of it in the future. And I've been told by an English-speaking friend that Google Translate apparently does a okay job with the content. So if you're really curious and want to read everything right now, there are ways. I'm sure you can do it. So I'm going to show you the results for 3 types of applications, and they're very concrete in terms of they relate to the story I told you at the beginning. Looking for a specific cover page with a bug on it, and is it green, and so on. So we worked on describing images, on extracting keywords from text, and keywords was a topic that resonates from almost all the presentations I've seen today. So this is another take at the keyword challenge. And then we tried to classify, that is, suggest BISAC or theme classification categories for our content. So, cover page images results. Some results were very good. This book, you can all see that it shows ice, a boat in the Arctic with ice and snow and so on. And on the right-hand side, you can see what the different APIs told us. So for instance, the AWS AI told us that it sees ice, a mountain, the Arctic, an iceberg. It even saw the boat. So, it's doing a fair job at describing what this image is about. The Microsoft AI has similar results, but it's also telling us that the dominant background color is white and the accent color is red, which also makes sense with what we're seeing on screen. So from those results, we think that we could take a few of those words and include them in either the keywords or maybe in a new metadata set for describing cover pages, and that it would be helpful in answering the types of queries we had at the beginning. At the other end of the spectrum, we also got very bad results. This one is very funny because AWS sees it as a bandage. IBM Watson sees it as a cereal box or a CD-ROM, and then CloudSide says it's a white and pink Hello Kitty print smartphone case. Which obviously doesn't fit. Actually, the only wise AI seems to be Microsoft, which says others, which is a prudent way of putting it. So basically what we did, and then one thing that was unexpected, and I think it's worth mentioning, Clarify, one of the vendors, seems to bring things that are not as that are more abstract. So on the first image, you see 2 people looking into each other's eyes, and obviously they're in love. And Clarify suggested the word togetherness, which was unexpected. First, because I didn't even know that was a word in English, but also because of the fact that it's really abstract. And same thing for the image on the right, where we see hearts made of paper probably floating or flying in the air, and the AI saw love and freedom, which was unexpected. Honestly, we would have expected like sky, hearts, or something like that. We haven't explored how to use those more abstract descriptors, but we think there's something to do with that. So how do we evaluate if it's useful to use those AI to describe book images? I won't go through the details of the metrics we developed to do that, but just to summarize the results, overall, stylish or cartoonish images don't give very good results. They were all disappointing, smartphone case type of answers. Photography gave good results, fair results, but sometimes disappointing. And it seems that it's the more realistic illustration type of cover pages that gave very good results. Actually, with Clarify, our satisfaction metric was close to 90% for that specific type of images. So to the question, should we use AI to describe cover pages? The answer is, unfortunately, it depends. So it depends on the type of images that you're dealing with, but you could expect some good results depending on the type of images. I'm going to talk about keywords now. Keywords are a lot more massive when you go through the books and you extract the entities. So the the NLP AI word for keywords is entities, and an entity is a thing, an object, a person, a place that is mentioned in a text. So for instance, for that book, the text tracer entity extraction API did find more than 2,000 entities. And what are they? Their locations, their events, their people, for instance, and they're very broad things like Manitoba, or more specific like Chicago, or even very specific like a specific cemetery in Notre-Dame-de-Lourdes. Same thing for the events, a very broad event like prehistory, or a very specific event like the gunfight at the OK Corral. So, and same thing for the people and the organizations. Our hypothesis was that those entities would be good starting points for keywords. Both keywords for the traditional supply chain and you know, the taking into account the 250 bytes limit for Amazon, but also keywords for more general applications, you know, going outside of Amazon, doing search engine optimization, diving into the topic of the semantic web, which is something completely new, and that at some point will, you know, definitely, maybe next year I'll talk about the semantic web. So it brings a lot of potential. So again, we created some metrics to evaluate the data, and I want to go quickly over the results. If you're looking for quantity, AI works. It really does bring a lot of potential keywords. In terms of originality, are those keywords different from the ones that the publishers already had chosen when they had chosen something for their books, or are they different from what's in the book description because, you know, maybe it's redundant? And the answer is yes, it's relatively original. We find a lot of things that were not in the description. Were they relevant? Again, it depends. And we made a small flowchart to help you decide and you know, should I use the AI-generated keywords? The first question to ask is, are you going to display those keywords to the end users or just use them for indexing? So if you display them, you definitely want some human curation from the relevance standpoint, but also from the spoiler standpoint. If by looking at the text you extract a location, which is the place where, you know, at the end of the book something important happens, you don't want to, you know, to put that on a website. Then if you don't display them, you just use them for indexing like Amazon does with the keywords, then you have to take into account, am I limited in the number of keywords? If you're limited, like we have a 250 bytes limit, again, you want to do human curation because you probably want to shrink that list to the most important keywords. If not, sure, go ahead. I think it's moving closer to having full search in the books from the user point of view, and it's always relevant. There's always some relevance to the keywords because they're from the text, you know, from the actual text. So they just work. Our third experiment was on subjects or categories, and this is a bit different because in the previous cases we could use off-the-shelf tools to get those results, but I can confirm you there's no vendor offering BISAC classifiers, pre-trained BISAC classifiers or thema classifiers. It's just not available on the market. So we had to train our custom classifiers, and training classifiers is hard in the book industry. Books are hard to classify anyways, even for humans, but the content is huge. Most of those vendors are creating classifiers for social media content. You know, are people talking positively or negatively about your brand? So 2 categories, positive or negative, and they're analyzing social media posts, so very short, or news stories. In some cases. So we had to eliminate a lot of vendors based on the fact that, for instance, IBM Watson is limited to 60 characters in their classifier, which doesn't make sense for a book. The other main concern is that we're dealing with, for instance, BISAC has more than 5,000 categories, whereas most vendors are selling things to route the email to your accounting, tech support, or a marketing department. So 3 categories, now we're looking for thousands of categories. And the other problem is that, not problem, the other reality is that we're looking to get multiple categories for the same book. Hopefully, if you want to increase discoverability, you probably want to suggest 2 or 3 different bisect themes for the same book, depending on the retailer. So again, most of the AIs are made to suggest one classification. And the other reason why it was hard for us to train was that even though we're working with 5,000 books, this is not still big data from the AI point of view. It's small data. Only 5,000 samples is probably not enough. But anyways, we decided to try it, to do it as a proof of concept and see how, the types of results we could get. We ended up having only 2 vendors that had solutions that could apply to our problem. The first one was Amazon Comprehend, the only one that could train on large text and a large number of categories. So we did content-based training for BISAC. So basically we said, here are all our texts, the BISAC codes that the publishers gave them, learn that, and then try to suggest new things for the books. We also found an interesting vendor called TextRaiser, and TextRaiser allows you to, it can be trained on only the subject headings. You don't have to provide examples. You just provide the words from the subject headings, and it can do suggestions. So we decided to use that to create a thema classifier, because in all our 5,000 books, we only had 16 with a thema category. So anyways, it would have been impossible to train on that data set. So we did it only on the subject headings. So again, some interesting results. For the book on the left, comprehends, the publisher had decided to classify that as juvenile fiction general, so BISAC code with 000. And then the AI suggested action and adventure and mysteries and detective stories. And if you look at the cover page, it may not be obvious, but when you read the book description, it makes sense. It's really a detective story in there. For the book on the right, this is a story about a smallpox epidemic in Montreal. And TextRaiser suggested vaccination and pharmacy, which also makes sense when you read the book summary. Vaccination was a solution to that epidemic and so on. However, it did not suggest fiction, but this really is a fiction book. So as you can see, interesting and mixed results, but also very bad results. Obviously, first example was that the publisher told us this is erotica. The AI said it's juvenile fiction. I don't think I need to explain why this could bring some problems. The one on the right, the AI said it's about gravity, economy, and macroeconomy. From the cover page image, I have doubts. Obviously, it's not perfect. And to be very transparent, we're still in the process of improving those. Our preliminary conclusion is that our comprehend classifier is very often suggesting very general categories, and actually this comes from the bias in our training data. Our publishers used those 2 BISAC codes, the most generic one, for 30% of the books in our sample. So the AI is just acting as a mirror and just sending back what we gave it as training data. So we have ideas on the ways that we can maybe oversample those books which have very precise categories and undersample the ones with very generic categories, and see if we can get better results, and other things that could be done to improve the results. TextRaiser seems to be great for nonfiction, identifying things like vaccination, or it's about guitar playing or things like that. But then for the fiction books right now, the results are more mitigated. So there's room for improvement, and we'll keep working on this. Then a few applications, and I don't know what time is it. I still have like 15 minutes. Good. The short-term applications for this are probably obvious, and they tie in with lots of things that you've probably heard today if you went to other presentations that talked about metadata and keywords and so on. We can generate a lot of keywords. Are they good? Could a human do better? Probably. Could a human do it for 200,000 backlist titles? Probably not. So those are applications that we think are useful and will provide all the results to our publishers, and they'll decide if they want to send that back to their metadata systems or not. But we also think there's room for more interesting applications that allow you to do original marketing around the book, and that allow book distributors or publishers to do things that people have done in the past for a few books only, and to scale it to an industrial scale with multiple books and multiple consumers. And so I thought, let's brainstorm a bit of what we can do with location information. You remember the mind map I showed you from one book with the location, the people, and so on? Let's just take the locations and see, what could we do to market our books based on the location information. So first idea, and sorry, I wasn't able to find an English text about this project, but this is an Italian startup in the tourism industry. They created a website with a map of the world with touristic destinations, and they mapped 200 books to those destinations. So if you zoom into Barcelona, you'll see books that take place there, and maybe you want to buy that book when you buy your ticket to Barcelona, and you have something to read that makes sense to where you're going. So they were able to do that for 200 books because they did it manually. Imagine using the content from the AI and then linking that to Semantic Web repository where you can get the longitude and latitude of all the places that were mentioned in the book, and then map those for one book or maybe for a whole a collection of books or hundreds of thousands of books. So this is one type of application to increase discoverability, this is a tough word for me, outside of the retailers. Another use that is very similar is that Wikipedia has lots of category pages for novels set in and then the name of a city. So you could, with an AI, generate a list of all the important locations in your book and be able to go to those Wikipedia pages. Make sure you do that by reading the contributor's guide to Wikipedia and so on. You don't want to spam Wikipedia, but having your books referenced there is very good from an SEO standpoint, and it's very good from a semantic web standpoint, as Wikipedia is a very important source of information. Location could also be used as a way to create targeted ads. If you've already bought ads on Google or on Facebook or any ad vendor online, now you can target consumers based on your location. So why not do a different ad for the people living in a small village in the north of Ontario if a book takes place there, and maybe they'll be more inclined to buy that book if you can say that this, it takes place in your village or in your place, or in the opposite, maybe you'll want to target people who are not in the area covered by the book for some reasons. But anyways, you could do geo-targeted advertising at scale because you have the location information. Another potential application is social media and being able to maybe post on Instagram something from your book. In that case, I just illustrated the cover page, but I'm sure you can, you could figure out something, make a big, nice artwork with the cover page and a quotation maybe from the book that tells about this place, and be able to pop up in the geo-targeted feeds in Instagram. And maybe you're thinking, well, that doesn't make sense. People won't buy my book because they see it on Instagram. Well, it seems that EasyJet, the flight operator, decided that it would work because in their studies, they found out that now an increasing percentage of people from 18 to 35 shop their travel destinations on Instagram. They're looking for Instagrammable places where they'll be able to go take a nice selfie and show it to their friends. And so they started to advertise their flights as Instagram stories or Instagram posts that are geo-targeted. So why not do it with books as well? I mean, if there's a book takes place at, in my example, it was at Notre Dame de Paris, so why not do it? A lot of other experiments that, the other initiatives that you could take that I haven't illustrated, I briefly talked about it. The Semantic Web, the web of structured and linked data is something that will be on the rise in the upcoming years. I showed you very quickly the search snippets, the rich cards on Google at the in the first few slides. This is something that is changing a lot. Has been changing in the last 6 months a lot and will keep on changing, and we'll see more and more of that. So, and you've probably noticed that sometimes you search for a location and it suggests you events taking place in that location. So why couldn't it suggest books that take place in that location? But also if you're looking for, searching for the name of an artist and that artist is mentioned in one of your book, or, searching for a pop TV show, why wouldn't the book be in the rich results on the right-hand side of the results on Google? And this is all feasible thanks to having keywords. And I haven't talked about it a lot, but for instance, TextRaiser is always providing you linked data references. So I'm going on the technical side, but URLs to the Wikidata page for those entities. So with that, you're able to do a lot in the semantic web area. Another type of application would be content-based recommendation engines. A lot of the recommendations that we see now, people who bought that book also bought such and such, are based on consumer behavior, and you can do that if you're Amazon and you have lots of consumer behavior data. If you don't, but you have the content data, maybe you could do recommendations engines that just are based on those, similar places or similar people or similar events in those books. Chatbots is obviously another application. If you have people that want to come and do the same type of queries, chatbots really are one step towards the vocal assistant. It's just that you type the questions instead of asking them. So the types of applications I showed at first could be as well implemented through chatbots with those data that we get from the AI about the text. So before we finish, and we'll have a few minutes for questions, I think, the next steps for TAMIS, first we need to finish the experiment on subjects. Like I said, we're not done. We think we can improve it a lot. We'll keep publishing the results on our website, which I've already mentioned. And the next step for us really is to build an interface, a UI for the participating publishers to go back, do some curation. I'm okay with those keywords, but I'm not okay with those. And then being able to export those and then maybe ingest it in their ebook distribution system or their paper book distribution system or metadata system. And maybe export it as well in the form of a JSON LD object, which is something you can put in your website, in the website source code for search engine optimization and being displayed on the rich result, the rich cards on Google. So do we have any questions?
The keywords, when you extracted them, did you measure them against any specific performance indicators to see whether they were working? Like, did you check, on Amazon, or sorry, on Google's data about monthly search volume or cost per click information or anything like that?
Not yet. For now, we're really concentrating on generating them, and hopefully at some point we'll get to measuring the results, maybe through another project, but right now we're focusing on generating them. So no, they're not in the wild yet. They're just in our databases for now, and when we send them back to the publishers at some point, then it will be useful to see which publishers did implement them and how it goes with their results.
You had a slide where you showed that the realistic illustrations versus the photographic. Why do you think it is that the photographs wouldn't provide more accurate results?
Honestly, we haven't found a clear explanation for that. It seems that a lot of times the photographs were used on a more abstract level or in a complex composition. You know, maybe the image I showed that was with a cat or a puma, I don't remember. So the whole page was white, and then there was that small picture of the cat. So I think it probably related to that, and maybe the fact that the illustrations where in general they were relatively sharp, nothing blurry and so on. So it's maybe something like that, but I could not explain. And the results are really, there's a huge gap between 50 to 90% satisfaction for those. But no, and actually most of the vendors that we're using, as far as I know, train their data set on photographs, not on illustrations. So now that's a good question, and we don't have a clear answer now.
Speaking of semantic web page, and let's say we are using schema.org to structure a web page about a book. I'm thinking if we are really intentionally to build up association with any keyword and our book title, I think basically we can do that. My question is, do we need a mechanism to supervise or monitor this association, the credibility of this association?
You mean to supervise it before you publish it to your website, or to supervise the results you get?
To measure the credibility of this association, because you can build up the by using the metadata you created, you can build up association with your book title. But because it happens to me sometimes when I arrive to that web page, I feel the association is not right. I feel someone is intentionally build up the association, but it doesn't work to me.
Oh, you mean on Google specifically?
Yes.
Yeah, Google has specific rules, and they're publishing those rules in a progressive way. So they're adding more information on their Webmaster Tools website to tell you why this association of your books with different topics is showing up or not on the web. So you have to use the test tool that they're providing for the schema markup that you're putting in your page first, to make sure that your markup is okay. And then there's lots of different criteria. And one of them is that you have to ask them for books specifically on Google. You have to ask them to whitelist your site. So, and there's a link to a form to ask them to whitelist your site on the Webmaster Tool or Search Console help page. I don't know if that answers the question. Or.
So my question is, will this problem happen in your project?
It could happen because it's, you're providing data, but then the search engine decides what they do with it. And providing data is not a guarantee that you'll get results. It's a requirement. So if you don't provide those data, you won't have results. If you provide them, maybe you'll get results, maybe not. There's no guarantee. Like anything SEO, it's always the same.